Hello, I'm Paul from Mode 7. I made a video a while ago called How to Be an Indie Game Developer, and a few nice people said they liked it and they asked me to follow up with something on marketing. Now, I want to talk about indie game marketing in a slightly different way from the way you normally see it discussed. The way it's normally discussed is as a list of kind of basic tips and tricks. And I think there's a lot of that content out there and it's pretty easy to find. I even wrote an article like that quite a long time ago for Gama Sutra that you can look up if you really want to hear about all that stuff. Stuff like having a Twitter, having a Facebook page, blah blah, writing blogs, and so on. Everyone kind of knows that stuff and everyone's doing it now. Even with more modern stuff like Twitch live streaming and so on, if there's a medium out there that you can use to communicate, then use it to communicate is the basic summation of all of those tips. What I'm going to do is try and talk about stuff that's a bit more general and also talk about motivation quite a lot, because I think motivation is very important with marketing, especially if you're a dev that is, working on your own game. The amount of marketing you can do is basically infinite, and I think deciding when and how to do it and also being motivated to do it alongside everything else is probably the most important thing. So I'm going to discuss that. The first thing I want to say is that you are doing marketing whether you like it or not. You may see that as a sort of annoying businessy term, but marketing is about communicating an idea. And at the very core of it, making a game is about communicating an idea. So that's why I think some of the most effective games from a marketing standpoint are things which have what I would call a unified concept. The example of this I'm going to use is Deus Ex. Deus Ex presents itself as a cyberpunk action RPG game, one of the first sort of action RPGs, if you will. Now, when you see a cyberpunk futuristic game, you immediately start to get associations. You think about the individual against the system, you think about conspiracies, you think about probably stealth, hacking, subverting things. The mechanics of Deus Ex really play into that. It has the kind of quick save mechanic where you will come across a scenario, a situation, a system, if you will, with guards walking around. The geometry is very kind of strict and obvious in that game, so you can see exactly where you're able to go. And then you start thinking about ways you can subvert it. You can try things out, quick load. You have this freedom, this power to find different ways of subverting the system. And that plays absolutely directly into the name, the art style, the music. Everything about the game is about creating this feeling of taking part in a wider system and messing around with it, which is what you wanted when you came to the game. So when you're starting out thinking about making your game, the name of it, which is definitely a big part of marketing, the style of the art, and how the mechanics work, you can draw this line right from the very basic principle of your game all the way up to the kind of tagline you might use in an advert, the kind of way that you would present your live stream, the kind of press opportunities you want to do. That high level sort of quite weird stuff in some ways links right down to what you as a creator are doing. That's what I want to come on and talk about next, because I think this is one of the really difficult parts of indie game development. I was talking with Alexander Bruce, who made Antichamber, about this, where especially in the current climate of indie games, it really feels like there's a lot of competition. There are a lot of people making indie games. There are great concepts coming out left, right and centre. Steam is changing. For those of us that work primarily on PC, all of that stuff is a big deal, and it really feels like it's kind of all bearing down on us. One of the things that you have to bear in mind is that when you're making a game, it's one of the most important things you'll ever do. That sounds like I'm really over-elevating the status of games, but I really believe in games, and I'm sure you do too if you're even thinking of making one. Not least because games take a really long time to make. Bigger, fuller games might take up to 3 years. Even smaller games will take a lot of your time and energy. And your time is the most valuable resource that you have. It's time that you could be working on other things, spending with your family, all of these other things. And you have a finite amount of it allocated to you in life, and you don't know how much of it you're going to have and what situation you're going to be in for a lot of it. So when you're making a game, that's of absolutely vital importance. You've put the most important thing you have in the universe into it, and you're trying to convey that to other people. So when I see devs who are kind of afraid to talk about their game, or they don't think that they're interesting, or they don't think that anything they're doing is interesting, if you're putting your whole heart and soul into something that isn't interesting, that you don't want to shout about every hour of the day, that you don't think is massively important, why are you doing it? A lot of this boils down to your willingness and your ability to actually talk about what you're doing. It's difficult because once you get into that mindset, you can start to get really worried. You can start to get obsessed with it. You can start to say, I didn't tweet enough today. I didn't do enough Facebook posts this month. I didn't put a screenshot on Screenshot Saturday. And you can start to feel it as a pressure. The people who are really successful at this, okay, some of them sometimes do feel it as a pressure, but they learn how to deal with that and cope with it. But I think the people who are really successful at it and keep it balanced are the people who just are naturally able to do that. They seem naturally able to just talk about anything. Any small decision they're making, that you get a tweet from them. If an interesting conference has happened, they're there talking about some interesting factor of their game. Because they recognise that what they're doing matters, and it matters not only to them, but to other people, and that other people gain things from it. If you're talking about something, someone out there will gain something from it. I might have not wanted to make this video because I didn't think this kind of more philosophical approach to the marketing side of it was interesting to one person. And that is something that I went through. I thought, are people going to listen to me talking on this topic in this way? Are they going to think it's overwrought? Are they going to think this and that? Do I have time to do it? It's now 5:45 on a Friday. I could be doing more stuff on Frozen Cortex. I could be doing all these things. But if you learn to figure out when stuff is actually useful to other people, and just have some self-confidence and say, yeah, I have had an experience here which would have helped me when I was starting, or may help someone else, or might just be complete nonsense that I'm rambling about that has no worth whatsoever. Sometimes it's good to just put that out, to remind people that you're there, to communicate, to be external about it. And all of those things are really, really important. Your game will have all these different facets that are fascinating to people. AI, basic rendering stuff, animation. You see a lot of people who are all doing very similar stuff in Unity, talking about little Unity tips and tricks and so on. And that's really helpful. Marketing doesn't have to be cynical, and I think the absolute best marketing isn't cynical. There was a sort of brand marketing consultant who was writing, and he said that companies often ask them about kind of what should their brand values be? What brand values should they try and convey in an advert? And he said, well, what are your actual values? What do you actually believe in? Unless you have something that is truly fundamentally something that you believe in as a company, then it's not going to work if you just kind of put up banners shouting about that thing. Similarly, as an indie game developer, if you don't kind of stand behind the kind of decisions you're making as a person, then everything will fall apart. It has to be genuine, which is one of the reasons I like indie games so much. So much of this is based on just having the gumption to ask for it or to do it. If you want to keynote a conference, just go and ask them if you can keynote it. If you want to go and talk to Sony, go and talk to Sony. That's got a lot easier now, partially because a lot of people were just kind of marching up to them or getting contact details and saying, hey, we're an indie developer, what can we do together? Don't do yourself down. Have the confidence, have the pushiness to do it. If you're not a pushy person, find someone who is. If you don't feel comfortable doing this kind of stuff, then you either need to get over that really quickly, or you need to find someone who can do that, because this is getting increasingly important. In the climate of a lot more people coming out of big studios, starting indie studios, phenomenally talented people making games that have great concepts, Steam getting more open, more stuff being released if you're on PC, it's gonna be so vital that you push your own stuff. Otherwise you will get lost. Unless you make a truly phenomenally exceptional game, which is also harder, if you're not out there talking about it in ways that suit you all the time, then you're gonna get lost. Now, this all plays into something that I'm seeing a lot of at the moment with developers, which is personality marketing. Now, you may not want to call it that, and it may just be a natural function of what people are like, but there are certain developers who are just way, way better known than a lot of other people. And the reason that is because they're talking a lot, because they have the personality that enables them to go out and talk and basically make friends with people. You don't have to be cynical about it. If you like people and you like making friends, then this is a great industry for you, because you'll have shared things in common with a lot of other people, with journalists, with these key decision makers at the top of companies. The head guy at Microsoft likes games as much as you do and cares about them and believes that they're important, like I was saying before. So if you take all those core beliefs and you actually do something with them, then you'll find that very liberating, and it will start to snowball. When we started out, there's a great indie developer called Jamie Fristrom, who is a really fantastic guy, and if you ever get a chance to see him talk at a conference or bump into him, then do. He was booked to speak at a conference in Nottingham, and he couldn't make it, and he got in touch with us when we were making Determinants, our crazy sword game, and said, I just want to pitch this over to you, does one of you guys want to do it? And I'd never spoken at a conference before, and I kind of just went, yeah, okay. And I ended up at the very first Game City, which is a UK event that a lot of devs will know, and a lot of devs have spoken at now. And I was there kind of in one of the first wave of indie developers, really, speaking. And I did this crazy rant about Far Cry and an old art game called La La Land to a few people in the basement of a cinema. And that was my first conference speech. And then I found myself having drinks with a BBFC examiner and Margaret Robertson, who's the editor of Edge at that time, and people like Rob Yescombe, who's a really successful writer and worked for Crytek, and all of these people, just from, I'd come to that from literally working with Ian in a bedroom on a kind of trestle table on 2 bad computers on a sword fighting game. And so then I became like the person who can talk at conferences, and it's just about doing that first thing. It's just about doing the first press release. If you've never done one before, a press release is just an email that you send to another person. You've sent an email to a person before, right? So you know how to send a press release. It's just about thinking about the opportunities and what is going to connect with people. Same with advertising. Advertising is the most technical side of marketing. But if you look into all the data on advertising and the way it works, people respond best to adverts they really like. That's why you have all these funny TV adverts and so on, because if someone likes an advert and it does the basics right, like having the brand name of the product in a good place, then it's going to be an effective advert. So even in that, which does have a kind of complex technical numerical component, and there's all kinds of different ways of doing it, and sometimes it doesn't work and so on, it's about the fundamental way you treat it. Because, goddamn, you're spending your life doing this thing. Why aren't you out there shouting about it? Why doesn't it matter more to you than anything else in the world that a big site isn't talking about your game? You need to have more of, this is the word that the internet hates more than anything else, a sense of entitlement. You need to believe that you and what you're making are interesting, otherwise nothing's going to happen. And I really don't think that things like cliques or not doing something the right way are things that you should be worrying about at all. As a lot of people have spoken about, there are cliques, there are groups, certainly of indie developers, who spend a lot of their time together, talk to each other, and maybe sometimes get suspicious of outsiders. That's just human nature. But if you look at how those groups behave versus groups in almost any other industry, they are some of the most open, respectful groups that you will ever encounter. And you just need to not be afraid of it. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your background is. You know, it's very easy for me to sit here and say a lot of this stuff, given my demographic makeup, my upbringing, and so on. But I truly believe that the main limiting factor for people in terms of getting their games out there, getting awareness about their games, and marketing is themselves. It's certainly still true of me, even though I come from a position which gives me a lot of advantages. The main thing I worry about is people not liking me, not liking what we've done, it not being good enough in some obscure technical way. We had a press release go out recently, and I was worried because a specific site didn't cover it. And we started to have self-doubt, like, oh, this game isn't interesting anymore because of this reason. And it turned out that we just hadn't sent it to the right person. And the other people at the site kind of thought that we had, and so just thought they'd take care of it. It was just like a technical mistake. It wasn't a personal reason. And I thought, no, hang on, there is something's weird here, I'll just follow up and ask them about it, and that turned out to be all it was. But if I hadn't had the confidence to do that, it might have got completely buried and completely lost. So I guess, to conclude this, probably not exactly what you were expecting when talking about indie game marketing. I will do some more technical stuff and specific tips on things if people do want that. I'm happy to do that. But I really think that it's about trying to get this urge within yourself to talk about stuff, to talk about things that are important to you, and then tempering that with the following. You're not competing with everyone else, which is something that Alexander Bruce said in our conversation, which is on Twitter, you can find it if you're so inclined. He said, it feels like you're competing against literally every other dev at once. And if you look specifically at each dev and each game, you're not necessarily getting less coverage than they are. But if you take it as a whole, it feels like a massive external weight on you that's going to drive you crazy, that's going to basically just upset you and paralyse you. But in effect, what you need to do is just use that as a spur, as a motivation to do what you can, to talk about your game in the most interesting way possible, and to get yourself out there, and not be afraid of getting involved with those conversations and what people will think of you, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you've only got one chance to do all of this stuff, and those games are going to disappear as you make each game, so put everything you've got into it. Warren Spector said in his Lifetime Achievement Award speech, which I saw for a set of bizarre reasons, that the most important thing is to make every game count. If you are really making every game count, you'll want to shout about every game, and you'll want every game to be covered across everywhere. I want to see the next indie game developer who is just a teenager with Game Maker, and they get covered on every single big site because they believed in their game, and they sent out the press releases themselves, and they did the YouTube videos themselves, and they did everything. Because it's so easy to do that. It's just about motivation, and it's just about getting out there and doing it yourself.